Back when I was asking what run I should do for my 5,000 subscriber special, someone named Coderific in Leespeak recommended this run. I ended up going with the randomizer Nuzlocke thing I did, but this run still seemed fun and I put it on my list to do later. Lo and behold, I did eventually end up doing it. Actually, I recorded this run a while ago, but one bit took several hours to get the footage that I needed for it, and I didn't end up getting that footage until now. It should be pretty obvious what that bit was. Anyway, I used one of those picker wheel websites to pick the enemy for every area, with only a few restrictions on what enemies I could actually pick. No NPCs, since that would be boring, no duplicates, so if I got a dog in the lower burg, I couldn't get it again in the depths, and that also includes similar cosplays, such as rat and dog, since they'd both just be naked with the claws, and also no enemies that I can't really cosplay, so no Hydra or whatever, and no torch hollows, since I can't really get a torch weapon. I'm also not going to allow the broken straight sword hollow anywhere other than the asylum, but luckily I didn't get it there, so I won't have to deal with that at all. Also, I'm just hacking in this stuff since it would be insane to grind for so many 1% chance drops, especially off of a single enemy in the asylum. Anyway, the asylum itself is incredibly easy, obviously, and we can move on. Our options for the burg are the hollow crossbow soldier, the firebomb hollow soldier, the spear hollow soldier, and the axe hollow soldier. And the worst one by far is the hollow crossbow archer, so of course that's the one I got. This was one of my first times ever using a crossbow, since they're generally pretty awful, and the light crossbow is far from the best of the worst. Aside from a few hollows early on, I made it a point to just run past most enemies. I did give myself 999 wooden bolts, since that's what the hollows seem to have, and unupgraded since we haven't even reached Andre yet. So of the few enemies that I did kill, it was a bit tedious to say the least. The worst part by far was the Taurus demon, but not because of the demon itself. Using the crossbow, an incredibly slow weapon, against another crossbow-wielding archer and a sword-wielding hollow is incredibly tedious. Not hard by any means, but tedious. Especially since I died to the Taurus demon a couple times, not knowing how to use the weapon at all, and getting very greedy. I would just like to clarify that if I did this run again today, I wouldn't die at all on the Taurus demon, I'd swear. I did this fight a while ago. Anyway, it's still pretty easy, so the Taurus demon does eventually go down. I ended up giving myself a bit of a false hope for the parish. I spun the wheel the first time and got the Balder Knight, as opposed to a random hollow, boar, rat, or channeler, which is great since their weapon is pretty good. And even if I had gotten the rapier variant, I'd still have half decent armor. I used the Balder side sword to take out Havel and the Baronite Knights before realizing I actually forgot to add the Baronite Knight to the wheel in the first place. Well, I still haven't actually killed the gargoyles, and it's not like those two are that big of an issue to kill, but the actual issue is that I ended up getting the rat. I guess it means I get the Naked with Claws cosplay out of the way here and I don't have to use it for the Capra Demon or Gaping Dragon, but I would have preferred to not get it at all. I gave myself a Claw +5 and some rotten pine resin, which won't be useful anyway, and nothing else. It is still the gargoyles. They're not exactly the hardest boss, but they definitely could have been easier. I did try to keep the pine resin applied, which honestly made the fight harder since I had to reapply it in the middle, but some simple timing makes it easy regardless. Our only actual option for the lower burg is the thief, since we can't do torch hollows, broken straight sword hollows, or dogs. That isn't exactly a negative, dog would have been worse, but a thief won't exactly be good against a Capra Demon. I guess we need to get through the lower burg in the first place though. The target shield, while not exactly good, does make the dogs a little bit safer to take out on their own, and the knife can just barely reach through the doors far enough with a jump attack to hit the thieves once, which helps a bit. The throwing knives aren't useful exactly, unfortunately, but otherwise it's just fighting the thieves and dogs pretty normally, if with slightly lower damage than you might be used to. It would be cool to backstab the thieves and take advantage of the crit multiplier, but it's really not worth it. Somehow, I was able to mostly outmaneuver the Capra Demon and the dogs and only got hit a couple times through the fight, barely even using the stairs. The bleed actually ended up being useful because of the otherwise low damage, and the Capra Demon goes down shockingly easily. We only have a couple options for the depths, the channeler or a butcher, and I ended up getting the butcher. Admittedly, I definitely preferred the butcher because the sack is funny. Their offhand grab attack thingy is a weird hook, which I don't exactly have access to, but I think the burying dagger is close enough. I normally just jump over the railing immediately, grab the large ember, and drop to the giant rat, which is almost exactly what I did this time. I also took out both butchers and all the torch hollows. I somehow failed to plunge the giant rat, but I was still able to kill it with an extra slash and run straight up to the bonfire. I figured a butcher's knife +10 would be enough to handle the gaping dragon without taking out the channeler, and I was correct. I did almost get hit a couple times out of greed, but it's still just the gaping dragon, and the knife does pretty solid damage, so the fight wasn't exactly hard. I feel like this fight is pretty underrated. Don't get me wrong, I usually skip it by virtue of skipping Blighttown for brevity, but the fight itself is pretty fun, and I love both the depths and Blighttown. Speaking of Blighttown, between the infested ghouls, barbarians, fire dogs, crag spiders, and blow dart snipers, I, of course, got the blow dart sniper. I figured the closest I could get to that was keeping the sack on with no armor and poison throwing knives. Because of that, I did end up running through most of Blighttown. There's no way I'm killing pretty much any enemy here with nothing but poison throwing knives. Maybe if I was playing Remastest or something? Actually, that's a good idea for a future run. Anyway, Blighttown is pretty easy to sprint through. Nothing really gets in the way aside from a couple fire dogs next to the bonfire. Now the real problem with getting the blow dart sniper is that Quelaag can't be poisoned, nor are the knives themselves enough to actually take out Quelaag on their own, so we need to summon Mildred, which entails fighting and beating Mildred first. I was expecting it to be kind of difficult, but I actually found the method I used to fight Mildred to this day. The knives were not worth it, only 8 damage a pop, but fall damage isn't affected by our weapons. So my method was to run up the ladder next to the elevator, stand by the ledge, parry her, then kick her off the ledge. Honestly, I think you can just go up the elevator and she'll end up falling off anyway, but I wanted to make sure I could do this first try, so I was just careful about it. The Quelaag fight isn't necessarily easy with Mildred. She's not exactly good at avoiding the static pools of lava, but just distracting Quelaag a bit with some punches and knives should be more than enough to help her through. It does require a bit of luck and well-timed dodges, but ultimately isn't that hard either. I decided to use the egghead for the ceaseless fight, since there's no way I'm using them for anything else, and they're also the only enemy we can really fight down here in the Demon Ruins right now. The fight is literally no different than normal, just run to the clothes, grab them, run back to the fog, and punch a couple times. I did want to mention that I got the egghead out of the way though. Immediately afterward, I got an egg vermifuge from Ingi and made my way up out of Blighttown, getting poisoned and toxic in the process, of course. Luckily, I had rested at the Daughter of Chaos bonfire and had 10 Estus, so I was able to make it back up to Firelink, just barely. Oh, wait, I forgot Latrek. Well, I still had some humanity to heal back up and make it to the elevator to Andre. I forgot that too. Awesome. Lucky for you, you're watching a heavily edited run and don't have to stick with me painstakingly making it all the way back to the parish. Between both man-serpent types, the Balder Knights, the Baronite Knight, Titanite Demons, and the Giants, the man-serpent mage was chosen by the wheel. The projectile does look like lightning, but it does magic damage. So I wasn't sure what to go with at first, but I eventually decided on Lightning Spear, since cosplay entails more looks than functionality. Also, the boots of the Explorer are the closest I can get to their pants. Sens isn't exactly difficult at the worst of times. I've run through this place naked more times than I can count, and in this instance I get a very normal run with pretty good weapons, which makes it even easier. Running past most traps is my modus operandi anyway, and the Iron Golem isn't much different. Just a normal decent weapon against an easy boss. I think if I had gotten the Giant I would have summoned Targus for him, but for this run it ended up being pretty easy, especially with the extra damage from the Lightning Spears. Anor Londo has quite a few enemies. Mimics, Silver Knight variants, Batwing Demons, Painting Guardians, Bolt Sentinels, Gargoyles, and what I got, the Titanite Demon. This was one of my favorite cosplays. I think the Black Knight helmet approximates the weird horn things they have pretty well, and the catchpole is a really fun weapon. It also just looks kinda silly. Fortunately for me, or maybe unfortunately since it doesn't exactly make super engaging content, this is just another instance of going through a level pretty normally with a very normal weapon. I don't have any poise, but I'm very used to that. Sometimes the gargoyles are a little annoying with weird weapons, but in this case that wasn't even an issue. A weapon taking out the archer in a single riposte is a good weapon, I think. Since it's using Twinkling Titanite, I'm going to upgrade it to max too. I don't need it by any means, but damage is damage and big damage is funny. Halberds, barring the halberd, are my preferred weapon type for Ornstein and Smough, the Titanite catchpole being no exception. Despite a pretty embarrassing death that wouldn't have happened if I did this run today, they didn't offer too much trouble, and they went down pretty easy on my second try via Super Smough, of course. Super Ornstein is never worth it. There are only 4 options for the garden, and we need to use 2 of them for Sif and the butterfly. Of the Frogray, which I honestly don't remember how I was considering cosplaying, the Crystal Golem, the Demonic Foliage, and the Stone Knight, I got the Stone Knight for Sif and the Crystal Golem for the Moonlight Butterfly. To be honest, neither of them are super interesting. The Stone Knight set is literally just a normal armor set and weapons in the game, and the best I could do for the Crystal Golems was just the Crystal set. The Stone Knight set did make me fat roll though, which meant I had to run all the way down to the Hydra incredibly slowly, and I used the shield on the Hydra, which I don't think I've actually ever done before. The sword was also at risk at one point because of the Tranquil Walk of Peace thing, since I wanted to try it on an enemy, having never really used it before. I ended up just giving myself repair powder, since the enemies don't really have to deal with that. Despite that, the Hydra went down in only 5 heads, which means I don't have to deal with a head over the water. Walking through the water to get to the golden golem and fat roll range is agonizing, by the way. I do not recommend doing this. Poise tanking Sith isn't really an option, but the shield makes it easy to not take damage despite the fat roll iframes being so limited. Admittedly, Sif isn't difficult to dodge either way, but the shield just kind of trivializes the fight, especially for how little health she has. The butterfly was, well, the butterfly. I didn't get the crystal shield because the golems don't use a shield, but arguably mid-roll makes the fight easier since it lets you stay under the wall longer, meaning the spread shot projectiles can't actually hit you. Also because it was doing so little damage with the crystal armor on. Unfortunately, the fight did take 2 cycles. The Crystal Greatsword isn't exactly the highest damage weapon in the game, but it didn't make the fight difficult by any means. For the 4 kings, I put Ghostblade for the ghosts and Ghost Dagger for the banshees, which isn't exactly incorrect. The Ghostblade is a dagger, but I don't know why I didn't put Banshee instead, or Jagged Ghostblade for the ghosts. Dark Wraiths were also an option, but I landed on the Banshee and didn't understand my own names. Point is, I used the Jagged Ghostblade and tried to look like a ghost, accidentally betraying the wheel. Either way, the biggest positive to using either of the 2 ghost weapons is that they're cursed and can actually damage the ghosts without needing to be cursed yourself. Despite that, I sprinted full bore through the ghost house and made it up the ladder without really using any strategy first try, which was very lucky. From there, it's just a sprint to the seal, and for some reason I ran to the valley bonfire and warped to firelink, despite the fact that the valley bonfire is closer to the 4 kings than firelink, and I didn't even rest at firelink for the 10 Estus. Either way, the Jagged Ghostblade has pretty bad damage, so I did use Power Within to make it a bit more viable. I don't think it was necessary, but it might have been for my skill level at the time I recorded this, on top of just mitigating some RNG. They didn't use much magic anyway, thankfully, but the 3rd one did use its grab attack a couple times and even hit me with it, losing me a soft humanity. This is just a case of making sure to take all your attack opportunities and being careful to only dodge when you need to, since you can strafe a good chunk of the king's moveset. For the Stray Demon, I rolled a Bow Hollow, which isn't good for damage, but it does make the Torch Hollows much easier to deal with. Honestly, bows aren't even that bad, they can just be kinda slow, and that's not an issue with the Stray Demon. Like, 126 damage isn't good, but when you can just stand behind it and pelt it with arrows, it's not that bad of a fight. I wasn't being super careful at first because I wanted RTSR range, which brought up the damage to 260 damage a hit, which made the rest of the fight go by in a flash. I just want to take a second to self-promote here. I actually did a full bow-only playthrough, and it kind of flopped in the algorithm, so if you like this run and want to go watch another one by me, that one, I recommend that one, it's really fun. The Phalanx is the enemy of choice for Priscilla, which I used against the Black Knight to get the doll because fighting them with a bow is annoying. I don't think I've ever actually used the Partisan, actually. Luckily, the Painted World is pretty short if you know what you're doing. Sprinting past all the enemies isn't recommended for a first-time playthrough, it will almost definitely get you killed, but when you know what you're doing and can just drop off a ledge, stand in the air, and roll straight onto the pathway to the boss, it can be a useful strategy, even if you get pushed off the edge by the Baronite Knight. Take 2 got me to Priscilla successfully, followed by 3 very unfortunate misses. Watching this back was honestly hilarious, but I did say that I've never used the Partisan. Shield poking Priscilla while she was invisible, the first time I've shield poked in a while, worked shockingly well for the leather shields, but I did have to back off and heal once. Next up is the Crystal Halberd Mimic for Gwendolyn, which ends up being a pretty uneventful fight, to be honest. The Crystal Halberd, being a crystal weapon, does a good chunk of damage and obliterates Gwendolyn in only 2 cycles. The health drain from the Symbol of Avarice was pretty unnoticeable too. For something hopefully a bit more interesting, the boar is the enemy I got for the archives. Obviously the iron set with the fangboar helm, but I chose the 4-pronged plow as my weapon since it has a charging strong attack. Wait a second, I'm playing as a pig. I have a much better idea for this cosplay. No, the initial idea for this cosplay was to put actual police audio, and then I realized that that was extremely upsetting, but I wanted to leave it in because police. I also think it's pretty fitting that the one place in the game where you fight innocent, pretty much defenseless women in a prison is the one that I got the cop for. Anyway. This next one is one of my favorite cosplays in this run because it looks so dumb. The demonic statues are fat and they can breathe fire. Now, while I am in fact fat in real life, I had to make my character fat in the game, but only their lower half is fat. Anyway, I tried to run past the Capra Demons and it didn't really work too well. I don't know why I tried that. Dropping down to the bonfire like a normal person worked out much better. Now, I did end up actually putting on Smo's chestplate for the boss fight. I assume I kept it off because I didn't want to slowly run all the way to the boss, but I do think I should have just kept it off. You'd think the Demon Fire Sage would be at least a little resistant to fire, but only a few copies of Fire Surge were more than enough to take it out honestly pretty quickly. I used the same enemy pool as the Fire Sage for the Centipede Demon, and for it I got the Taurus Demon, but that necessitated getting more strength to just wield the weapon. Luckily, it's pretty easy to lure the demon onto the starting platform by just standing in the corner for a bit, and the slow attack speed of their weapon isn't really an issue unless you get pushed into the lava then attacked immediately after. Oh good. At least it's easy to escape his grab attack without taking any damage. Seriously though, the only damage the actual boss did to me was the stomping attack that has some pretty funky hitboxes and came out way faster than I was expecting. The Bounding Demons are the only enemy in Lost Izalith that's viable for this challenge, since I've already done the demonic statues, and I have no idea how I'd go about cosplaying the Chaos Eaters. I'm pretty proud of the cosplay I came up with though. I think this might be my favorite, aside from maybe the Titanite Demon cosplay from earlier. Having the thickest thighs in all of Lordran luckily doesn't change the Bed of Chaos fight all that much, even when I don't actually have a weapon, since damage doesn't matter against her. My thighs did weigh me down when attempting to make the jump to the second chain thing, and kicking it, well, that didn't really work very well. Dropping through the catacombs with nothing but a falchion equipped isn't exactly hard, and well, the boss here is Pinwheel, so obviously the fight was pretty close. The mask that I got is actually relevant though, since I got the Pinwheel clones to go through the tomb with. I honestly kind of forgot they existed, despite having to run past them in literally every single run. Either way, the Mask of the Father doesn't exactly produce much light. Skeletons aren't exactly resistant to fire though, luckily. A few great fireballs and one fire surge was more than enough to take out Nito damage-wise, and his constant friendly fire makes my fire much easier to use, since I don't have to deal with 3 skeletons constantly. Not having poise isn't great for this fight, but with this much health, it's really not that much of an issue. All we have left is the DLC, and I'm very not used to fighting the Sanctuary Guardian with fat rolls. Believe it or not, armor made of stone is pretty heavy, and a giant chunk of rock as a weapon isn't exactly light either. Somehow, I was able to dodge a couple attacks, and even take advantage of the damage negation from the armor to get an extra hit. The damage is incredibly high, and the Guardian doesn't have much health to begin with. I never really considered tanking this boss before, and I don't think I'll be doing it in the future, but it does technically work. Or maybe I just got really lucky, either way. Next up, we actually have to pretend to be the Chimera we just killed. Of course, I have the Fangboar helm for the lion, the Moonlight set for the wings, and the Scorpion tail for, well, the Scorpion tail. Unfortunately, the poison isn't going to help all that much against Artorias, and this whip does less damage than the normal whip, but the normal whip was pretty good when I used it. Oh, okay, well, I guess I can just do a little bit of damage with this until I take damage and get put into RTSR range. That damage is a lot better, if not great, and luckily I fought Artorias enough that not getting hit isn't that tall of an order. The jump attack damage is actually really good too, over double the normal R1 attack. Whether or not the chain set and 4-pronged plow is a good representation of the chained prisoner is up to interpretation, but I think it's pretty funny. The prisoner does drop this set, and the weapon does represent its running attack pretty well, at least, even if I couldn't emulate flinging the ball and chain very well. The weapon does more than good enough damage to the bloatheads, and I got very lucky with the hardest part of the DLC, taking no damage at all from the 2 sorcerers and 3 bloatheads. The prisoner must have been fooled by my disguise too, since it let me run past pretty easily. I haven't had much trouble with Manus since the Asylum items only run, and the damage here is much higher than that. I even managed to pull off the charging attack without falling over several times. Somehow, even when I did fall over, I was able to get through unscathed. The only hit I took during the entire fight was from getting unlucky with the rain attack. I don't know what I was thinking with my Scarecrow cosplay. I know I wanted to represent their weird little cloak. I tried using the boots of the Explorer for the green lower body, but it didn't look right. I mean, this doesn't either, but I think it's more accurate. This is the 3rd time I've used the plow this run too, but it's obviously the weapon they use, so I can't really use anything else. Calamite can be difficult if you always try to roll into the attacks, but if you roll away from the neck swipes and such, and apparently get very lucky with some of the fire attacks, Calamite goes down pretty easily, despite his massive health pool. A little bit of risky use of the red Tearstone ring finished off the fight with excessive damage too, and that was pretty fun. The only enemy in the kiln is the Black Knight, obviously, but the question does remain, what Black Knight do I get a cosplay? The axe is probably the least commonly used Black Knight weapon, just because there's only one place in the entire game before the kiln where you can even get it in the first place, and it's pretty far off the well-trodden path. I really like the moveset, but obviously that doesn't really come into play with Gwyn. Also, seeing the player in the Black Knight set next to the actual Black Knights is really funny. Anyway, Gwyn does go down first try to a few parries, obviously. I had a lot of fun recording this run, and then obviously a few months later I actually wrote it. I kind of wish I would have done this earlier because this was a really fun run, but either way, it's done now, and I thought it was fun, and I am happy with it. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I love you all, and I especially want to thank Lilith the Hammer Witch, Nick Possum, Ratini, Frankie, Krista, Howling Nocturne, Ryasune21, Rakuna, White Flame, Manorock, and Ryan Rickard. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. I don't know how to end this.